Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I am your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 86, the season 3 premiere. We started off with me just doing this show from my dorm at Stanford because I wanted to talk more about sport karate. We didn't even have video. I was just recording audio on my phone and uploading it to whatever app I could. Then we were very fortunate to have Black Belt Magazine pick up the podcast. That was season 2. Everything that you've seen on Black Belt Magazine of the Jackson Rudolph podcast, that was all season 2, all kinds of exciting guests, too many to even name, so many incredible shows that we've had so far. But now it is time for season 3. And one thing that I didn't announce very widely before tonight's episode is that season 3 means the Jackson Rudolph podcast is getting a new format. That's right. It's not just going to be interviews with special guests. It's not just going to be me talking about one particular topic, but now we're actually going to be breaking the show down into a series of segments. So I'm going to give you guys a quick overview of how the podcast is going to be running for season 3, and then we're going to dive right into today's topics. The main one being New Year's resolutions for the sport karate community, things that we can do better as sport karate as a whole to continue the growth of the sport, to keep spreading the sport around the world, and to make the sport as big as we all wish that it could be, right? So the way that the show is going to be broken down for season 3, we're going to start off with a segment called This Week in Sport Karate. This is going to be all the news and happenings that's going on in the sport karate world. Basically just some bullet point highlights of everything that you need to know that has happened this week in the sport karate scene. And of course, that segment will be a little bit longer after tournament weeks. Like we got the AK Warrior Cup coming up. I got my Sharky shirt. That's a pun. For Sensei Sharky, who puts on the event. I cannot wait to be there covering with Black Belt Magazine, doing the commentating for this show on Saturday night. That might be some breaking news for anybody that didn't know. I'm going to be on the mic again for the Warrior Cup finals, so I'm extremely excited for that opportunity. But anyway, back to the format of the show. So we got This Week in Sport Karate that's going to kick off the show every week. Then we're going to get into our topic of the day. That's the main show. That's what you guys know and love about the Jackson Rudolph podcast. Sometimes that'll be a guest. Sometimes it'll be a discussion topic. And now, since we do the show live and today's just me on the screen, drop those comments. I want to interact with you guys. So we're here live for a reason. Drop those comments. If you've got questions or you have your own thoughts about the discussion, make sure you drop that in the comments down below. Then after we finish the topic of the day, we're going to be moving on to what I call a history highlight. And this was heavily requested from our viewers, was to get some little tidbits of sport karate history. I try to go back and tell the stories and the memories and talk about the videos that I've gone back and watched from before I was around the sport karate scene, and try to have some veterans of sport karate on the show to talk about the history. Well, there's going to be a segment of the show that is set aside every single week to talking about some element of sport karate history. It might be a retired competitor. It might be a key moment in the sport. It might be the time that a new trick was developed. Who knows? It's going to be different every single week, and there's going to be a competitor that I'm going to highlight this week for the history highlight. And then one of the most exciting parts of the new format is we are going to have the hashtag JRP, Jackson Rudolph Podcast, the hashtag JRP challenge. So every single week at the end of the show, I'm going to be announcing a social media challenge that you can post to Facebook or Instagram with the hashtag JRP challenge. And the winner of that week's challenge will get featured in the following episode of the podcast. So at the top of the show, the following week, I'll shout out whoever the winner was, why they were the winner, and depending on the circumstances, may even do a little highlight, or sometimes they might even be a guest on the show if they were the winner of a challenge. So those are the 4 segments that the Jackson Rudolph podcast is going to be divided into for season 3, and season 3 starts right now. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over here. As you know, this is a one-man operation. So I'm going to switch over to my comments, say what's up to some people. We got Carol Ann in the comments. How's it going? Jeremy, good to see you, sir. Absolutely. Enrique, Happy New Year. Happy New Year, everybody. Hope that everybody had a restful holiday season and is ready to get back to the grind, whether it's with work, with martial arts, whatever it may be. It's time to kick 2022 off strong. And here's the start of the Jackson Rudolph podcast in 2022. So with our first segment, we've got This Week in Sport Karate. First and foremost, today is the Black Mamba himself, Rashad Eugene. It is his birthday, so shout out Rashad Eugene. Happy birthday, my man. One of the top competitors in the sport right now, and it's his birthday. That qualifies as news to me. Let's see what else we got. So this one I saw on Instagram, and I guess this might be like some TMZ type news, I guess, but we're going to throw it in here anyway. Did y'all see that Steve Tirada, the great Steve Tirada, Team Paul Mitchell, Steve Tirada, all-time extreme forms and tricking legend, is training form sections again? Now, before anybody goes crazy, he's not training to go compete. I highly doubt that Steve Tirada is going to make a competitive comeback. I wish that he would. I hope that happens, but be realistic. That's not going to happen, right? But it was cool to see him posting on his Instagram that he was training some form sections and looking like he was running sport karate CMX forms sections. So he'd be in the 30-plus division now. That 30-plus division this year is going to be deep. I mean, that division is incredible. You got Jeff Doss making a comeback. You got Edgar Cordova. That division is just so stacked from top to bottom. You got Sam Diaz, who won several overalls last year. And there's a number of names that I could go into. You also got the guys up in Canada that can hopefully come down. Eric Tremblay, Andrew Cavallo. That seniors division right now on forms and weapons is absolutely loaded. But Steve Tirada is not going to be joining anytime soon. But it is cool to see him doing some forms combinations. Next, speaking of comebacks, now we know Steve's probably not coming back. Tyler Weaver Jr. posted on his Instagram, he posted a comeback video recently. So at first, it was just kind of this ominous video without much detail. That was him walking into a martial arts school and pulling out some commas. We haven't seen him on the competitive scene in several years now. The audio that was playing during this video was basically a voiceover of some of the ESPN commentators from Tyler's performances over the years. And that was set to this like real dramatic scene of him walking into the martial arts school, which definitely looks like a comeback video. And then he confirmed it. He did an update video on his Instagram for his following post, and he talked a bit about how he is planning a comeback to sport karate. He kind of left us a little cliffhanger saying, maybe we'll see what happens. But I think that would be extremely exciting to have Tyler Weaver back on the scene. Obviously, in my opinion, Tyler's probably a top 10 comma competitor of all time, which is huge. Like if you can make it into the top 10 of any weapon, all-time greats, what else can you ask for, right? So Tyler's on that list. He's also a historically great CMX forms competitor, and he's won pretty much everything there is to win. He's a Warrior Cup champion. He's a Diamond Ring winner. He's a multi-time ISK US Open champion. When he was a kid, he was on Oprah. He was probably one of the most promising young prodigies in the history of sport karate when he was 8 or 9 years old. So to see Tyler potentially be making a comeback is huge. The bladed division next year, if we're talking about the weapons divisions in the adult ring, if Tyler comes back with that comma form, you got Dawson Holt coming up from the 16-17 division. He's going to be an adult this year with the sword. But look at just the comma depth in that bladed division. Birthday boy, Rashad Eugene. Alex Mancias, Diamond Ring champion, newly minted, right? Alex Riggs of Team Infinity. We got Connor Chastain. It is an extremely deep lineup, and that's just the bladed side of things. You look over at non-bladed, we got guys like Jake Presley, maybe Aiden Considine makes a comeback. The non-bladed side of things has some great talent as well. Maybe Jackson Rudolph shows up. Maybe he steps out for a tournament. Who knows what happens, right? But no, very exciting that Tyler Weaver could be making a comeback. Some more news. Within the magazine space of the martial arts community, we've got Alex Reyes and Point Fighter Live. They're going to do a second issue of their magazine. And Sue Diaz of Team KTOC, she will be on the cover. So congratulations to Miss Diaz. That is awesome. So congratulations to you. Great to see you getting that recognition, and great to see more and more media outlets covering sport karate. Now, this one, I was able to pinpoint a few names from whoever I follow on social media, but Cobra Kai Season 4 has a ton of sport karate talent doing the stunt work. Just the few that I was able to find and mention, and I know there's more than this. We got all-time great, in my opinion, the greatest CMX competitor of all time, Matt Emig. We got Cole Eckert, Craig Henningsen, both Team AKA legends. Nate Andrade, one of my favorite bow competitors of all time. We've got a ton of sport karate talent that is appearing for stunts and acting in Cobra Kai Season 4. So as I know, many of the Black Belt Magazine followers have already checked out Cobra Kai. But definitely, if you're a sport karate fan, be looking for those faces in the crowd as you're watching some of those fight scenes, because I think that's pretty cool. Anytime we see people from the sport karate community getting a shot on the big screen on Netflix, whatever it may be. So shout out to everybody involved in Cobra Kai, especially if you got a sport karate background. And I have one other bit of news that I'm going to leak. And I'm only going to half leak it because I know more than what I'm supposed to say on the air. So I'm going to half leak this. But I can guarantee that we are going to see top level, seeded, world champion, whatever word you want to put there, top level forms and weapons competitors in brand new uniforms at the AKA Warrior Cup. And I know everybody knows about the public ones, right? Like Competitive Edge, we announced some of our new big additions. I'm very proud to say that Competitive Edge was making a big splash by adding a bunch of junior talent this offseason. But there's also some moves that nobody knows about that I think is going to be it's going to be pretty interesting. I will say, because you guys know I'm a Paul Mitchell guy, I'm not saying anything about Paul Mitchell. What I'm saying has nothing to do with Paul Mitchell. So don't ask me. Don't come at me being like, who's getting on Paul? I don't know. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about other teams. People that got nothing to do with Paul Mitchell. There is at least one big acquisition that's really, really interesting. And I know, of course, now that there's going to be all types of discussion about who is it, what's happening, right? But I do not have the liberty to say that. But I got my feelers out about what all's going on. I got my sources. And we are going to see some top competitors, or at least one top competitor on a brand new team at the AKA Warrior Cup. And that's all I'm going to say about it. So I'm going to leave you guys with that teaser. If you want to find out who's going to win the Warrior Cups, you want to find out who's wearing a new uniform, if you want to watch the AKA Warrior Cup Finals, make sure you tune in to Black Belt Magazine, who's going to be streaming the whole thing with the help of a great team around us. A lot of different people are involved. Shout out to sportmartialarts.com and others for help making some of this stuff possible in the sport karate community. But Black Belt Magazine is going to be streaming the AKA Warrior Cup. And if you guys want to know some of this stuff, you just got to tune in and watch the AKA Warrior Cup Finals. And that's going to do it for this week in Sport Karate, our news segment of the show. Now, we're going to move on to our next segment, which is going to be our main topic of the day. And we've got New Year's resolutions for the sport karate community. I got a list here on my phone. I'm going to read down the list. It's a top 10, but it's not a top 10 in order. It's just 10 resolutions, 10 things that the sport karate community can do better in 2022. I'm going to switch back over to the comments tab and see what people are saying. Looks like we got some people curious about some of the news that I'm dropping here, but that's all right. That's all right. Hey, we want to start that conversation. You guys got questions? Feel free to drop those down in the comment section below. But now we're moving on to some sport karate New Year's resolutions. So again, this is in no particular order. I just kind of went with it as they came to mind, and my goal was to get 10. So number one, this is a resolution for all competitors, and it's a general one. Be more innovative. I tell this to my students all the time, and I know that's kind of anticlimactic. Like, of course we need to be more innovative, right? But when it comes to the CMX divisions, the Creative Musical Extreme divisions, the longer that I've been in this sport, the more that I start to see trends, right? It often seems that whoever the top adults are at the time, whether that be men, women, forms, weapons, whatever, whoever the top adults are at the time, in the junior divisions, we see a whole lot of replication of what those adults are doing, which makes sense. Those kids watch the adults, they get inspired by them, they try their tricks, they try their stuff because they want to be just like those top adult competitors. That's totally fine. The other trend that I noticed, though, is that those competitors, those junior competitors that rise above the pack are always the ones that find some way to innovate and do something different than what has been done before. Right? And sometimes you get a kid that's just really talented and maybe they do something that we've seen before, but they do it really, really well, right? But I'm talking about those that you know are going to be remembered for a long time in sport karate. Not someone who, retires at 18 and then goes on and does something else or whatever, and then 5 years later, nobody remembers who they were, right? Which is a travesty. Those competitors should be remembered too, but I digress. I'm talking about competitors that if you went to a tournament and saw them compete, you're not going to forget it. And so those names live on for 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it may be. They get talked about on a podcast like this in 2022 when they stopped competing back in 1999 or whatever it was, right? In order for you to be able to achieve that, you have to do something that leaves an impact on the sport. And if you want to do that through your creative, musical, or extreme routines alone, you have to do something that hasn't been seen before. If you just go out there and do a bow form that looks like Jackson Rudolph, so you do a combo form that looks like Tyler Weaver's or whatever the case may be, you're not going to be remembered for innovating anything because you just looked like this competitor or that competitor. right? If you want to create a legacy for yourself in this sport, think outside the box. And I know it's more complex than that. You don't just sit down to train one day and you're warming up and stretching and you're like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to change sport karate this way. This is how I'm going to change the world, right? That's not how it works. But it's through trial and error, and it's through actively trying to push the boundaries of what you can do. The more that you push those limits, the more that you will discover. If you're a weapons competitor, this is the way that I thought of new tricks and new ideas when I was at my prime of training, was I would literally dedicate half an hour of my 4 or 5 hour training session to just messing around with my bow. Put music on, work the bow, do tricks, don't do anything specific. I'm not doing reps. I'm not running my sections, nothing like that. Literally just 30 minutes of headphones in, music playing, and just vibing, just doing something with my bow. And oftentimes I would do something and be like, wait a minute, what did I just do? And then I'd record it, right? And then I'd go back and I'd watch it and be like, what if I did it at this angle? Or what if I caught it this way? Or what if I spun this way? Or what if I did this strike coming out of it? Whatever the case may be, right? And that's how you get that ball rolling, and you get the snowball effect of new ideas, and you build new combos, and you make new forms. And eventually you turn around and you're like, wait a minute, nobody's ever done it this way. Nobody's ever done it quite like this. And that's how you start to innovate. So my number one challenge to all sport karate competitors in the 2022 season is actively try to innovate. That's a big one. Moving on, number 2. Let's see what we got. So this one is one for more of the community as a whole, not just competitors, but really the powers that be got to work on this, whether it's league promoters or other important officials with various leagues. We got to modernize the creative forms rules, right? And I'll get on my soapbox about this one because this is something I believe very strongly in. And I often hear people talk about how the rules are just confusing. And absolutely, that is one level of this, right? If we use NASCA as an example, there are some rules that get pretty confusing, right? Like the way the rule is written, you are allowed to do any 360-degree rotation, no more than that, and you are not allowed to invert your body. Well, to me, that sounds like the perfect description of a butterfly twist. For a butterfly twist from takeoff, you do a 360-degree rotation. Your head and body should be parallel to the ground. You should not be inverted when you do a butterfly twist. Yet, a butterfly twist is considered an illegal move in the NASCA Creative Forms division. So you have a rule written one way, but a move that should be legal by that definition is illegal, and competitors have been disqualified for it, right? So there's the confusing elements of the rule like that. There's also an arbitration that I talk about often where a 540 kick landing on the feet is illegal because it's called a 540 kick and therefore is more than 360 degrees of rotation. Although technically you can do a 540 without rotating a full 540. I'll digress there. But if you do a 540 kick and land on your knee, according to an arbitration that occurred over a decade ago at this point, that is considered to be legal. So I can do the same technique standing and I can do the same technique landing on the knee. One is legal, one is illegal, right? And so there's obviously some confusing elements of these rules. But here's the thing that people don't often talk about that I believe is one of the most important reasons that we need to modernize the creative forms rules. And that is, look at the runoffs. In the runoffs, and for those of you that are tuning in on the black belt side that aren't familiar with sport karate, I'll explain this briefly. Runoffs is essentially a semifinal round of competition. In order to narrow it down to ultimately find a CMX Creative Musical Extreme champion, those divisions have to compete against each other. So the winner of the creative, the winner of the musical, the winner of the extreme divisions, they all face off and different age groups come together, and that's a lot more complicated than we need to get into right now. But basically you have creative forms against musical forms against extreme forms, the same thing on the weapons side. In weapons, I never really suffered the issues associated with the limitations of creative, because in the weapons side, you can just add more tricks. There's no limitation on weapons tricks that you can do. And so when I was up against an extreme winner that maybe did commas and could trick all over the place, I could make up the difficulty gap by doing bow tricks, right? Because there were no limitations on that. But on the form side, time and time again, I have seen high-level competitors get their win in the creative forms division, and maybe they had a bad night or some stumbles in musical and extreme, and they go into the runoffs with their creative form, and it's really, really hard to break through. It's extremely difficult with a creative form where you don't have a weapon in your hand. All you got is stuff that you can do with your body, trying to make up the difficulty gap between competitors that now in extreme are doing double corks and shuriken cutters and all of this crazy stuff, whereas the creative competitor is left to do at most a 540 kick to the knee. Now, there are competitors that have tried to overcome this, right? I've seen competitors do some wild stuff within the limitations of creative, right? Jump, turning halfway around, split kick, turning the other halfway around. Incredibly impressive, difficult but it only uses the 360 degrees of rotation and it still works, right? I've seen Tyler Weaver do that. I've seen Matt Emick do that. I've seen a guy like Marcel Jones run creative forms and run them all the way to Diamond Ring championships because of his sheer power and strength and mastery of technique, right? But that's not something that everybody can do. So how do we decrease this difficulty gap that is so evident between the creative winners and the musical and the extreme winners? Well, what I would suggest is that you allow in the creative forms division as many rotations as a competitor pleases, but you still outlaw inversions, because the whole point of creative outlawing inversions is so that every open forms routine doesn't just look like a gymnastics routine with some chops and punches in the middle. So I support the fact that creative outlaws inversions, but don't put a limit on how much a competitor can spin. Because if you're going to let a competitor jump up, spin one time in the air and throw an outside crescent kick, the martial arts there is the crescent kick. Why would you limit their ability to do the spins if they need to close that difficulty gap? Let them do a 720 before their crescent kick. Let them do a 1080 before their round kick. Let them do a hurricane kick, as many kicks as they want to in one jump. Because all of a sudden, if you have a competitor that does a double cork and a competitor that beautifully executes a hurricane kick, which I believe is a tornado kick similar setup, you jump up in the air and then 3 consecutive hook kicks on 3 consecutive spins. All of a sudden, that difficulty level is pretty comparable. And a judge can make a decision between, I prefer the execution of this technique or the execution of that technique. And the difficulty is on an even playing field, which increases the parity of the CMX runoffs and makes them much more exciting to watch, because you're not just expecting whoever goes up there with the creative form to lose, which is not how it should be. In a semifinal round, every single competitor should have an equal opportunity to win that division. And right now, with the creative forms limitations that get carried over into that runoff round, it's not fair when you compare the difficulty with what people can do in the extreme and musical divisions. So modernization of the creative forms rules, that is my second resolution for 2022. I'm going to check the comments real quick. Let's see. We got somebody commenting sport karate or American karate. Have you never heard about WKF? Actually, we've got some great sport karate competitors that go over to WKF. Ariel Torres traveled the sport karate circuit for a while before starting to focus more heavily on WKF and went and won a bronze medal. So absolutely, as a member of the sport karate community, I know about and support the WKF. When I say sport karate, it's referring to the major sport karate leagues in the United States, such as the North American Sport Karate Association, that expands to other leagues as well. We also talk about, like over in Europe, they have WACO, World Association of Kickboxing Organizations. I'm not going to get on my soapbox responding to a comment, but yes, absolutely, I know about and respect WKF. Michael Brumet says, do you know who caused the arbitration? So I'm not going to get into who all caused the arbitration, but I do remember it was Compete Nationals a long time ago, and it was 2 young competitors against each other, which is why I'm not going to mention names, but it was a great rivalry that happened over the course of that season. And essentially, you know, this was early in the season, and that rivalry was just kind of starting, and one competitor did the 540 kick to the knee. That competitor's coach said, hey, he went to the knee, therefore it wasn't a full, it wasn't more than a 360, which technically, by definition, because you don't have to do more than a 360 to do a technical 540 kick, I think that it was probably just a 360. But because the logic that was used by that coach to explain it focused on the fact that the competitor went to the knee, that then changed the way that that rule is looked at, right? And it's complex, and not a lot of people know it, but that's why in these divisions, you never see somebody do just a straight up 540 kick and land on their feet, because they know they'd get disqualified, but you see people do 540s and land on their knee all the time. That's the reason that is. Let's see. Kaylin Kowalski chiming in says, I like that. Agree. Thank you, Kaylin. Appreciate the support. She says, my only problem with it would be what makes a significant difference between creative and extreme besides no inversions. No, I don't think that comment's poorly worded at all. I mean, I think that ultimately, creative, musical, and extreme forms will always have some level of similarity. Most competitors copy and paste the same hand combinations or striking combinations into those routines already. I do think that if you don't allow inversions, all of a sudden you eliminate, nobody's doing flash kicks to the corner. Maybe nobody's doing the same trick combos that go across the ring with a touchdown raise and a gainer, or a touchdown raise and a cork, right? Because those moves would not be legal. So you would force competitors to do slightly different looking forms because they're having to focus the form around the creative kicking instead of focusing the form around straight up tricking and inversions. So I do think there would be differences there. And of course, with any new rule, there would be a trial and error process that goes into it. But now I'm going to jump on down to the next New Year's resolution for the sport karate community. Now we're going to jump over to the point fighters. We've got, and this is for the judges, stop calling defensive side kicks that are just chambers. I cannot tell you how many times I have been watching a point fighting event, whether it be NASCAR or otherwise, and I have seen a competitor lift their leg up into a chamber and barely extend it and not get any stopping power on the blitzer or the reverse punch or whatever. And then the judges call 2 points, right? Well, for NASCAR, it'd be 2 points, for the league's 1 point. You know what I mean, right? The judges give the call to the side kick that didn't get full extension. And I'm not even necessarily saying that it's got to be a perfectly extended textbook side kick every time somebody throws a defensive side kick. But it should at least have enough stopping power to stop the offense of the fighter that was attacking. That's the purpose of the defensive side kick, is to stop the opposing fighter's momentum, right? And so when a fighter simply lifts their leg up and is falling away and their foot happens to touch the other fighter without any extension, all of a sudden, on NASCAR at least, you're giving 2 points for a technique that really wouldn't have done anything. Even if it was thrown with full power, if you throw something at full power but don't get any extension, where does the power even come from if there's no extension, right? So it's not like it's some level of control for light contact. I see way too often straight up just a chamber that happens to touch somebody gets called as a kick, and I think that that's something that needs to change. If kicks are going to be worth 2 points, somebody's got to earn those 2 points. It needs to be a good kicking technique, and I'm seeing a lot of the comments coming out. Doug Little, as a 36-year-old competitor that can't flip and has to compete 18 plus with Pro-Mac, I'm glad creative and extreme are separated. Absolutely, that's a great point. I mean, I'm somebody that has never been able to trick or invert my entire career, right? I competed in extreme weapons for a short time because I did a cartwheel to pick up my bow, which was embarrassing, and then did a bow form from there. And I actually got a few wins and got a world championship doing it that way because I had several judges at enough tournaments that said, we like the weapons better. And so that's why they went my way. And I was very fortunate that it worked out that way and those judges saw it that way. But absolutely, having a division that doesn't allow any inversions makes it so that in the CMX divisions, competitors that don't want to do all of the acrobatics, want to do all the flipping upside down, they don't have to. They can find other ways to find success. And I think that's why that has value. Let's see. Sammy Smith chiming in. Friend of the show. What's up, Sammy? Jackson, don't lie. You had a solid aerial and a cheat 720. My aerial was decent. My 720 was less than decent. Not good enough for me to ever put in a form. So that wasn't going to happen. And then we got another question coming in. And Liz Lapp says, do you think it's better / advantageous to have a form for creative and a different form for extreme instead of the copy and paste method? Yes. Should this be how judging is done? No. In principle, a judge should sit down to watch a division and should score only on that division and the competitors within. The judge should not score based on other performances they have seen from the competitors in that division. It should be purely based on what they see. However, judges are human. Judges are influenced by human things. So if a judge notices that you have done a completely different routine from the creative division to the musical division to the extreme division, there's a good chance that that judge is going to see that performance in a better light. Because most of your competitors, if you're on that third division, the judge has already seen almost every other competitor do their same form twice now. So if you go out there and do something different, even if a judge is doing their best job, there is a psychological impact that judge, if they notice, will be like, wait a minute, that's a different form. They went the extra mile, they put in the extra work to make another form. Again, in principle, a judge should only judge based on that division, but when you consider the fact that judges are human, and you put that psychological factor in there, I absolutely think that it can be advantageous to change your form between divisions. And I've often done the same thing. If let's say I was running creative musical weapons and the first division didn't go my way for whatever reason, I would intentionally put something different, something dynamically different, whether it's a different trick or a different combo, whatever, into the next routine so that I would show those judges, hey, you obviously didn't like what I did the first time enough. Let me show you something different. And most of the time, fortunately, that worked out for me, right? And I'm sure that some of that had to do with that psychological impact of showing the judges that you've gone through the effort to choreograph another routine. So I absolutely think that that can be advantageous. Moving on, we're going to jump down to the next one. And let's see. So we just talked about defensive side kicks. Okay, this is a big one. And I probably should have saved this for closer to the end, but I'm gonna put it out there now anyway, because there's not a whole lot to say about it, but it needs to be said, and it has been said many times on my show, on other shows. Shout out to Martial Arts Center Network for all of their great podcasts. We got to work towards bringing back prize money to the level that it used to be and beyond, right? When I wrote a Black Belt Magazine article just before Christmas about things that sport karate competitors should want for Christmas, I talked about prize money a little bit, and I think that I used the word antiquated or archaic, one of those words, to describe our prize money structure, right? Because the prize money for adult overall grants has been $1,000 forever in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. And by the way, I completely sympathize with the promoters on this aspect of it. We are in difficult times right now. There's not as much money flowing as there used to be. And so I understand why the decision was made for NASCAR tournaments to pay $500 prize money, cutting it in half, eliminating runner-up prize money in the overall grands in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. I understand it. I sympathize with those promoters. I'm not saying that we need to start paying full prize money right now, but I do think that the plans need to be put in place to not just get us back up to the $1,000, because let's be honest, with $1,000 of prize money, a competitor not only has to win the whole tournament to get that money, but at $1,000, depending on the tournament location and where the competitor is having to fly from to compete, especially if that competitor isn't sponsored, that competitor is going to barely break even on that event, right? And so I think it is essential that we work on trying to boost that prize money, get the sponsorship, get the eyes on the sport needed to gain that sponsorship so that we can bring that money in so that we can compensate these athletes appropriately. I've said it many times. My career is closer to its end than it is to its beginning. I'm not fighting for this because I want to get paid more prize money. It's not about me. It's about all of these kids right now that are 9, 10, 11, and 12 years old that have decided to dedicate their life to sport karate, that have decided that when they're 23, they want to be on the U.S. Open stage on ESPN or getting streamed by Black Belt Magazine or Jungo TV or whatever it is. These little kids that have made that decision, I don't want them to get up there and achieve that thing and then be handed a check for $500. I want those kids to ultimately be able to make a living off of sport karate. In the near future, you're going to have to teach seminars. You're going to have to do other things in order to make a living off sport karate. But getting the prize money leveled up is one step in that direction. And it also makes our sport look more legitimate to all the other professional sports around. I was looking at golf, and I know that golf is bigger than sport karate, and sport karate is a niche thing, so golf will always be bigger than sport karate, right? But I was seeing something on the Golf Channel the other day, and it was I think it was like the Masters, and it was ranking like whoever won the Masters and however many millions of dollars they got. It went all the way down to like 50th place. You can get 50th place at the Masters and still get six figures, right? 50th place at the Masters, still get six figures, right? You could be the best sport karate athlete in the world, and you could win your division, the overall grand championship, at every single tournament, say 12 tournaments over the course of a season, and you'll have $12,000. A perfect season, $12,000 in sport karate. 50th place at the Masters, six figures. It's those types of disparities that if sport karate ever wants to be a legitimate professional sport that gets all the coverage that we've always wanted, that's one of the things that has to happen. And I know that the money doesn't come first. The eyeballs come first, so we got to make our sport better for the spectators. Then the sponsors come because we have the eyeballs. And then once the sponsors come, the money can rise. But we have to keep our eyes focused forward in order for that to happen. We can't always live in the past of, this is why the prize money is this way and this is how we have to do it. The other thing that I'll add is that you have to make the structure the same between the men's and the women's divisions, right? As of right now, the men's divisions, There's separate prize money paid for the CMX Overall Grand Championship. We'll just use forms for the sake of simplicity. The CMX Overall Grand Championship and the traditional Overall Grand Championship. On the women's side, the women compete traditional against CMX, and so they only get one set of prize money for the traditional competing against the CMX. Well, the men get to double that, and the traditional winner gets that prize money, and the CMX winner gets that prize money. Now, I don't care if you split the women to match the way the men are, or if you put the men back together to match the way the women are. Me personally, I think either can work. Promoters decide whatever you have to decide, right? I get it either way. But it should be the same between the men and the women. There's no reason that there should be this difference in the way that it's structured. The way that it's structured should be consistent. The field of competition should be the same, regardless of if you are male or female. And so that is my soapbox about prize money and where it needs to go in the future. I'm seeing a bunch of comments come in, so I'm going to address these before we move on down the list. Let's see. Man, you guys are commenting like crazy. I love it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, let's see. We got Andrew Cavallo tuning in. He says, same thing applies for extreme musical forms. Quite often I judge extreme musical forms back to back. I think I'm watching the same division. Absolutely. That was to our last point. Sammy says should be per division like it used to be a while ago. Yes, back in the day, they would give $100 to an adult that won every single division. That would be great. That's another great step in the right direction. That reimburses that competitor for their entry fee into that division, which makes perfect sense to me. And actually, if it's $100, they probably get a little bit more than what they paid for that division, assuming they register for multiple divisions, right? Let's see what we got here. All right. Andrew Cavallo, go back to when they had divisional prize money. Absolutely. And Doug Little, what about offering free admission to the next year's tournament on top of prize money until the money comes? That's something that would have to be decided on a promoter-to-promoter basis. One of the difficult things about that is that I feel like in the recent years, we've had a lot of turnover in the promoters. And so you go from an event being promoted by one person to being promoted by another person. And then all of a sudden, if you're saying, okay, well, we're going to waive the entry fees for people that win whatever division or whatever grand championship this year, well, then all of a sudden the tournament belongs to somebody else next year. There's an inconsistency there. However, I think that that's a good idea. I think those ideas are good. That's something that we can build on. Absolutely. All right, let's see. So I'm seeing a bunch of comments rolling in here. Gabrielle, my fiance, tuning in. Thank you, Gabrielle, for tuning in. Appreciate it. All right, so now we're going to jump back into my list. I appreciate you guys commenting. I'm going to keep having an eye on those and responding to you guys' comments. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And let's see what we get now. All right, so we talked about prize money. The next New Year's resolution for sport karate, and this goes for everybody, competitors, parents, coaches, stop conflict with judges. I just talked about how we want to get more eyeballs on our sport, make our sport look more professional. Professionalism is not having these heated conversations and exchanges with judges over, well, you trained that kid 5 years ago, or this judge doesn't know what he or she is doing. I see it all the time, right? I see it in forms and weapons when people don't like the way that their kid or that they get scored. I see it all the time in fighting when a coach or a competitor does not like a call, they get in the judge's face. That cannot continue. And I know that in point fighting, there's penalties for it. I know that if the judge, if the coach leaves their chair, then there's a warning and there can be a penalty point. I get that. But there shouldn't have to be a penalty point. There shouldn't be a problem. We are martial artists. We are supposed to respect each other, right? And that goes for the parents too. Parents, if you're not a martial artist, your kid is a martial artist. So you should still be respectful of those officials and the other parents around you and those other competitors, right? So set an example for anybody watching sport karate. Show them what it means to be a martial artist. I don't care if you're a competitor, a parent, a coach, whoever it is. Stop conflicting with the judges, the referees, the officials. Let them do their job. And if there is a problem, handle it in a professional manner. Because we do sometimes get a judge that might need to be educated on something, or a judge that maybe might be up to no good with judging somebody they have a relationship with, whatever. But there's a professional way to handle those things. Maintain your cool. Mention it to the promoter. Mention it to an arbitrator. Address that judge respectfully. But all of the scenes that we see created regarding issues with judging is something that simply cannot continue in sport karate. And I'm seeing some more comments chime in, so I'm going to read a couple of these. We got Andrew and Ernesto chiming in. Let's see. Andrew says, I've been around for 30 plus years, so I've seen a bunch of changes. Even with all the advances, there's small things that make it regressive rather than progressive. Prize money is one. Absolutely. I think it's a combination of a bunch of those little things. Mr. Lopez, let's see what you've got here. What are your thoughts on a judge judging a competitor that is from his school or team? What can be done to correct this? I've seen this be a source of drama at a few tourneys. I think that starts with the judge, right? I think that in most cases, the judge should know better that if somebody from their school or their team or one of their students is in the division, they should remove themselves, right? I've been sitting in a ring before judging divisions because somebody needed me to step in. All of a sudden, I see one of my kids come up to line up for a division. I find a replacement. I step out. One of the unfortunate problems in sport karate right now is that there seems to always be a judge shortage. And so sometimes you wind up with that overlap where it's not because the judge is up to no good or the competitor's up to no good, but there simply aren't any other judges around. At world level tournaments, that should not be a problem. At regional tournaments, I can understand how that happens often, and sometimes we just have to live with that. But at world tournaments, there should absolutely be enough judges at that event where you can wait, find the replacement, and make it fair, make it right. So yes, absolutely, that's something that needs to be addressed. But again, it's one of those things that can be a little bit difficult to navigate depending on the size of the event. All right, we're going to move on here. So stopping conflict with the judges. This is another one for competitors. We're getting into the latter half of the resolutions here. This is one for competitors. This one might surprise some people that I'm going to say it. Don't be too conservative. In weapons divisions in particular, this is where it matters most, because in weapons divisions, dropping gets you disqualified, right? Don't be too conservative. In the tournaments that we've had back since the end of the pandemic, Battle of Atlanta, US Open, Diamonds, etc. Watching those events, I have seen on far too many occasions, in the adults, in the juniors, youth, 13 and under, whatever it may be, I've seen many occasions in which a competitor who was talented enough, who had a good enough form, who performed well enough to win a division, give it away because they didn't throw enough, right? There's two reasons this happens. Number one is when a competitor goes into a division knowing that they might be the most talented and the most skilled, and so they do the bare bones version of their form because they think that they'll win just because they're the most talented and they're the most skilled in general. But on that night, on that day, somebody else could win. Somebody else could do more. Somebody else could do the best strikes they've ever done in a form, the best cuts they've ever done in a form, and hit all their tricks and put on a show. And you open yourself up to losing if you hold back all of your best stuff. Over time, judges gain an expectation of a competitor. When certain competitors go on stage, they are expected to perform at a certain level. There is a level of difficulty that is expected of that competitor. And once as a competitor, you have set the bar that high, if you dip below that bar, those judges that watch you in every division, in every runoff, in every overall, and they know your form, they will know that you held back. And if whoever you're competing against doesn't hold back, automatically, whoever didn't hold back has the upper hand. And the judges will likely score in favor of who did not hold back. The second reason this happens is sometimes competitors over-strategize. And they say, okay, well, if I hit my form, I can put pressure on so-and-so and this, that, and the other, right? Well, I have two responses to that. Number one, if you hit a form that has nothing in it, you're probably not going to put much pressure on the competitor, on your fellow competitor. You're probably going to make them think, oh, they didn't do much. I have a chance to win, right? And on the other end, right, if you over-strategize that way, you could come into contact with the same effect that I was mentioning before, where the judges would notice and then the judges would reward the person that went for it, right? And so as a competitor, you should always go for broke. You should not base your decisions on what others might do. Now, if you're lucky enough to be going last and you see other competitors have visible mistakes, bobbles, they drop, they get disqualified, right? Then of course, modify your form to do what you need to do to secure the win that day or that night. But if you're going before competitors, if there's other competitors that still have a chance to beat you in that division, which is anybody in the division, if there are people after you, you need to perform at your best. Because if you don't perform at your best, at your highest level, then whoever comes after you just might beat you, right? And so that is primarily a public service announcement geared towards top competitors, seeded competitors, world champions, right? The other thing that we have to remember is that if we want sport karate to grow and we talk about trying to make sport karate impressive, well, if the division's been kind of dry and there's not really too many other people in it and the people that were really contenders drop, and then you go up there and you run a basic form, that basic form isn't going to be as impressive to somebody who's seeing sport karate for the first time. And they might not catch the sport karate bug because of that, right? This is something that I believe it's a Kobe Bryant quote. Kobe Bryant, I think Vanessa, maybe in one of the events after Kobe's passing, was telling the story about Kobe and why Kobe played when he was injured and why he always gave 110%, even if they were playing the team at the bottom of the league or whatever, right? And Kobe's philosophy was that there might be someone in that arena that has never seen Kobe Bryant play. There might be somebody who saved up all their money for a year to go to that game to watch Kobe Bryant play. I don't want to disappoint that person. That is the exact mentality that any high-level weapons competitor should have when they step in the ring. It doesn't matter who else is in the division. It doesn't matter what might happen. What matters is that you go out there and you put on the show that you have prepared for that event. The form that you train in case everybody hits their routine, that is the form that you are obligated to run for the fans, for those of us that love sport karate, for everybody that is streaming sport karate, for everybody that is trying to make sport karate bigger. Put on a show for them. Put on a show for that 9-year-old kid that's sitting in the back row of the night show that's watching you perform for the first time and says, I want to be like that person. I want to do those crazy tricks. I want to be that fast. I want to be that clean. I want to be that intense. Put on a show for that person. For all of those reasons, don't hold back. Don't be too conservative. If you leave the stage at AKA Warrior Cup thinking about what you could have done more, that's a problem. Every single time that you have the opportunity to step on stage, especially at a major, embrace it. It's the Warrior Cup. It's the US Open. It's the Diamond Nationals. You have a chance to perform on that stage. Embrace it. Don't hold back. Do all you can, because one day you won't have the opportunity to do all you can anymore. That's my public service announcement for not being too conservative in weapons forms. Moving on. Next, sport karate resolution here. We got don't be too conservative. Only got a couple more here. And this one also goes with anybody that's going to be on stage at AK Warrior Cup. Show some personality on stage. Again, if we're trying to make sport karate better for the spectators, don't be a robot going on stage. A lot of people, like when they go on stage to perform, that they feel like they got to not be too over the top. And you don't. You don't want to be arrogant. You don't want to be cocky. You don't want to give off that kind of vibe. But you can show personality without being over the top and being arrogant and being overconfident. Right? You can show personality just by the way that you walk on stage, making eye contact with people in the crowd, taking that second to get your bearings on stage before you cue your music, right? I think that a lot of times there's this very robotic, like, go on stage, go to my spot, start my music. And maybe it's because competitors are nervous. Maybe that's just their thing. They like it to be, kind of anticlimactic, and then they start to perform or whatever the case may be, right? But I do think that in general, competitors need to show a little bit more personality, right? Let out a big yell when you go on stage. Get the crowd into it. Point fighters, I got to tip my cap to point fighters. Point fighters do a great job of this. Point fighters, if they land some crazy kick, somebody in the head, get 2 points, 3 points, whatever, they're walking on the stage, let's go, right? Like, point fighters do a great job of showing personality when they're on stage. When they don't get a call they want, and it's not okay to throw a fit, but if you don't get a call you want, you go, right? I see fighters do that all. That's good. That shows something to the spectator. That shows that you weren't happy with that call, right? Not over the top, not throwing a fit, but just showing that personality, right? There's nothing wrong with showing personality. There is something wrong with going over the top, But I do encourage anybody that's going to be on stage, show some personality, help the spectator get to know you, because that's what's going to make them want to follow you, want to be a fan of you, and want to continue watching sport karate, right? Next New Year's resolution. We've got, here's a good one. Here's a good one for everybody on social media. Stop disparaging our own sport on social media. If you are someone who wants sport karate to get better, and you are constantly posting all of the things that are wrong with it and all of the things that you think are stupid about it, you're not helping, right? It's good to start conversation. It's good to say, hey, how can we improve this, right? How can we improve this? That question is completely legitimate, because there are a lot of things to be improved in sport karate. But making blanket statement posts and doing live streams about these blanket statement things and saying that, sport karate sucks for this reason, or this division sucks, or this division shouldn't exist because I just don't like it. All of that type of conversation does not help the sport move forward. And for somebody to say on the Black Belt Magazine page, I'm sure we have some of you tuning in right now who are not sport martial artists, who have never been to a sport karate tournament, right? And if you were to see sport karate competitors and parents and coaches and judges and whatever bashing their own stuff, chances are you're probably going to be like, well, wait a minute, why, if they don't even like it, why should I like it, right? But the truth is, there's a lot that sport karate has to offer. There are world-class athletes that compete in sport karate. But you, as a competitor, as a parent, again, whoever the role player may be, if you're going and you're posting all of these negative things about sport karate that then people outside of the community are going to see, and it's going to further deter them from sport karate, you're not part of the solution. That's part of the problem, right? And so using positive communication when it comes to issues, right? And I think that by and large, Richard Osborne's group, Open Martial Arts Tournament Discussion, does a good job of this, right? A lot of Richard's questions that he posts personally are positive. Hey, this is an area that we don't do too great at. How can we be better, right? How can we be better? That's the question that we should be asking, not just pointing out all of the negative things and all the things wrong with the sport. That's something that I feel like is really, really important, because the sport karate community, relatively small, but we are mighty, and we need to be united in trying to grow our community and not trying to find all the reasons to tear our community down, okay? Let's see what we got here. We got one more resolution, and then I'll look at the comments before I move on to the history highlight for this week. So last resolution, and I'm just going to read this word for word the way that I wrote it in my notes. Come to every event expecting to earn your respect. Too many people nowadays expect to win, to be on a team, to make stage. It is earned, not given, right? And I wrote that because of a number of different interactions that I've had over recent months, right? But I can't tell you how many times somebody brand new to sport karate, and this isn't their fault, this is because of things that they've heard from other people who are already in the community, right? Somebody new to the community doesn't know any better, right? But I can't tell you how many times I've had people come to me and say, hey, we're getting started in sport karate. When do we get on a team? Not how do we get on a team? When do we get on a team? I'm like, wait a minute. No. That's not just given. Right? Just because you compete in sport karate, and it doesn't mean you get assigned to a team. That's not how this works, right? I had to compete in a blank uniform for 2 years before I represented the team, right? You have to earn your right to represent a team, and then you have to climb up the ranks of that team. If you want to get on one of the big sponsored teams, right? This is how this works. You get on one of the local teams, or one of the regional teams, or a team that maybe your coach has put together, right? And then you build and you develop within that team. And then over the years, you develop a resume, right? And for those top teams, if you're looking at, you want to be on Paul Mitchell, or you want to be on Top 10 USA, or any of these top teams, right, that have sponsorship, right? Oftentimes, to get on those teams, you got to put together a resume that includes 10 overalls or better, right? It's not about just showing up and being there that's going to get you put on a team, right? Just because you've been competing for a year doesn't mean that you're going to make it to runoffs, right? You have to earn your right to go to runoffs, right? And then if you do get to runoffs, also maintain perspective, right? Don't make it to runoffs and then think that you're ready to win your division every time, when really you made it to runoffs at a tournament where, well, 3 people didn't show up because they had COVID or whatever, right? Maintain perspective. Say, okay, this is great. I got that experience. I got to feel what runoffs was like. I want that again, but my top competitor wasn't there. I'm going to train so that I can beat my top competitor so I can earn my spot in runoffs, so I can earn my spot on stage, so I can earn my overall grand championship, so that I can win overall grand championships and earn my spot on a team. Opportunities in this sport are earned. They are not given, right? So don't feel entitled. Nobody in this sport is entitled to anything. You have to work for it. You put in the work, you put in the hours, you get the results, and when you get the results, that's when the opportunities come, right? So don't walk into a tournament. Don't walk into the 2022 season expecting to be given things. You have to earn everything in this sport, and I want to see every single competitor at Warrior Cup fighting to earn what they deserve. Those are my Sport Karate New Year's resolutions for 2022. Drop some comments down below. Let me know what you think. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at these comments, respond to a few of them, and then we'll get on to our last 2 segments of the show here. Let's see. Kaylin says, what about memes? No, I'm serious. Again, memes can go both ways, right? I have seen sometimes the memes that get posted about sport karate get directly offensive towards specific individuals who really haven't done anything to deserve it, or it's just generally just very negative about the sport. Those memes are bad. Now, if it's a meme that's like relatively light and makes fun of somebody for something silly, or, you know, makes fun of something silly that we all know that we do that's silly in sport karate, such as how we all wipe our hands off on our uniform before we do a form, like that stuff's funny, right? Like making TikToks about, shout out Kaylin, making TikToks about sport karate, that stuff's funny, right? Like there's a line, right? So if there's this imaginary line between a meme or a TikTok that is going to directly offend somebody or directly bash sport karate versus something that just makes fun of something that happened in sport karate or a trend in sport karate or whatever, stay on this side of the line. Don't go to that side of the line, right? I think that's pretty simple. And that's true for any community, right? Just don't be offensive, and memes and TikToks and all that are fine. Anyway, Andrew says memes bring what we think but are afraid to say. Absolutely. And that's part of the thing, right? Like the reason I'm doing a podcast like this is to open up those conversations so that people don't have to think that whatever they say is going to upset people, because you're approaching it from the perspective of, hey, I want this to be better. I want to improve the sport for reasons X, Y, and Z, right? If you come at it from a positive light, completely changes the tone of the conversation. Let's see. Andrew says, shout out Top 10 USA. Absolutely. Let's see. Jerry Groves, thank you for tuning in, sir. Shout out to Alice. He says, well said. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you guys. All right. So that does it for our first 2 segments. We've got This Week in Sport Karate. That's the new news segment. We've got the topic of the day. That's going to be the guest, the discussion topic. That's going to be the brunch of the show. And now we have our history highlight. This is going to be a competitor, a moment, something from sport karate history. Every week, I'm going to reserve this part of the show to highlight some element of sport karate history. And I'm going to give you guys a chance to guess this competitor, okay? So in the comments, be active. Try to guess this competitor. I'm going to start by saying, starting today, we are 2 weeks out from Warrior Cup. And my historic highlight of today is the winningest Warrior Cup competitor in the history of sport karate. Now, that should be a dead giveaway. I should see a comment coming in any second now that says that the all-time Warrior Cup wins leader is no other than Michael Brumet. Got it first. Ross Levine. Right? Kaylin Kowalski said, no, I am not the all-time Warrior Cup wins leader, nor would I do a historical highlight of myself, because that's a no. I'm not doing that. But anyway, so Ross Levine is the all-time Warrior Cup wins leader. He has 9. I do believe I happen to be in second place with 7, but I'm not upset about my 7. I do have the most weapons Warrior Cups all time. But Ross Levine is who we're talking about for most Warrior Cups of all time. And the reason I'm highlighting Ross Levine is, now historical highlight is for any retired competitor. Ross is, as far as we know, technically retired from sport karate competition. He's now doing amazing things in the full combat world. Glory Kickboxing Knockout of the Year, won his debut for karate combat, and he's coming for that belt pretty soon. I predict that Ross Levine is going to get that belt in the karate combat arena, so stay tuned for that. But as far as sport karate goes, Ross Levine is an extremely influential part of sport karate history, right? There's a number of reasons for that. I put together a bulleted list of some of his achievements achievements that I want to read off first. So, all-time Warrior Cup wins leader. Won it with both weapons and sparring. That's very rarely ever done, and almost unimaginable in the modern era for somebody to win the Warrior Cup for both weapons and sparring. And Andrew's exactly right. Ross Levine won both weapons and fighting cups in 2005, his first tournament on a NASCA event. So to make your NASCA debut and win both the weapons and fighting Warrior Cup, that is unheard of. Ross Levine did that, right? Let's see. So I also wanted to mention, everybody knows about Ross for his point fighting, right? Ross is an all-time great point fighter. He's in my top 10 of all time for point fighting. That'll have to be another episode. One day I'll do an episode where I give my top 10 point fighters of all time, but I digress. So Ross Levine, one of the greatest point fighters of all time. That's what he's remembered for. That is not what I remember Ross Levine for. And I watched hundreds of Ross Levine fights, right? I remember Ross Levine for what he did for bow, for what he did for weapons. Because Ross Levine is one of the most important innovators of bow in the history of the art of creative staff, right? So Ross was a student of Nate Andrade. For a long time, I thought they were just training partners. I had Ross on the show early in the existence of the Jackson Rudolph podcast, and he actually cleared that no, he trained under Nate. He came to Nate for training, and Nate taught Ross his way, right? Which is why you see a lot of similarities in Nate's style and in Ross's style. And I do want to shout out Nate Andrade for being the original innovator of probably 80 to 90% of all the body rolls that we see in competition, right? I'm talking shoulder neck rolls and reloads, rolling the bow up the body, the voodoo child, a neck roll, spin around, catch the bow at the end, right? Nate Andrade is the man responsible for so much of that, right? And even though Nate was the innovator of the tricks, Ross took what he learned from Nate and he turned it into overall grand championship wins at tournaments. And sometimes he got these wins in the height of the men's weapons division. Some of the titles that Ross won was in the midst of the Kalman Choka era, where he was winning almost every overall that came with his double sword routine. And Matt Emmig's nunchuck form was in those divisions. And Rudy Raynon's kama form was in those divisions. And Mark Canonizato's kama and then sword form were in those divisions, right? During that time period, in the middle of Kalman's Diamonds run, Ross Levine won a diamond ring in weapons. 2009, I think it was. Kalman won 2, and then Ross Levine won, and then Kalman won another 2, right? So for Ross to be able to get a win in that era, and I believe at Diamonds that year, Kalman happened to drop, but that doesn't matter. Winning is what matters, right? And Ross Levine, in the middle of when the men's weapons division was as deep as it has ever been, Ross was winning major titles, right? And I believe he's won the U.S. Open with his bow form before as well, right? So Ross Levine, not only for his contributions to point fighting and how everybody knows him as a point fighting legend, he is a legend with regard to weapons. He is absolutely a legend. He innovated bow. He was essential to the progression of bow to the point that it is at today. I would not have done some of the things that I have done if Ross Levine had not done some of the things that he has done first. That is a fact. Ross Levine is that influential, right? And I just realized that the banner is still on. Oh, Andrew added first as an adult. Yeah, I had heard first as an adult. When you said first as NASCA, I was like, really? But I trusted it. But yeah, definitely his first tournament as an adult. I had heard that before. And I'm going to change my banner now to the history highlight Ross Levine because I've been talking about him for the past several minutes. All right. Let's see. Yeah, Andrew points out Nate was in Cobra Kai 4. We mentioned that at the top of the show. Absolutely. Michael Brumet, fact checking me, says 2009 is correct. That's the year that Ross won his diamond ring. That was off the dome, by the way. I didn't look that up beforehand. I knew that off the dome there. Anyway, also, I got on my list. We're talking about Nate. We're talking about Ross. Tall guys with sticks. Iconic team sync. Iconic team sync. One of my favorite team sync forms of all time. It was fun. It was entertaining. The bow tricks they did in that routine were ahead of its time. Tall guys with sticks was awesome. Ross was one of the 2 members of that team, right? And then I wanted to talk about a moment that I remember, and this really, I think, sums up Ross Levine well and kind of what he has meant to sport karate history. I remember a U.S. Open one year where Ross Levine was fighting for the overall title on stage, and it was, I think it went to overtime. It was a long match, close match, and Ross came off that stage drenched in sweat, right, exhausted, just fought for a U.S. Open title, right, huge fight. Okay, I don't even remember who he was fighting, right? Because what I do remember is that Ross came off that stage, drenched in sweat, And then because of the way they had scheduled the show, they didn't think that there'd be any problem putting point fighting immediately followed by men's weapons, because they were like, oh yeah, fighters, weapons, whatever, right? Well, then Ross Levine turns around and is like, I'm in men's weapons. And so Ross comes off stage, drenched in sweat, takes his gear off, grabs his bow, goes on stage within minutes and runs a bow form on stage at the US Open on ESPN, right? Who does that? Like, nobody in the modern era of sport karate does that. Like, there's not anybody I can think of post 2000 even that was that good at weapons and fighting to where they could do that. They could literally come off stage from a massive fight, drenched in sweat, pick up a bow, go back on stage, and run the form for the men's weapons division. And it's not like he was at the end of the weapons division. I'm pretty sure he was first. Like, I'm pretty sure it was literally he came off stage, grabbed his bow, they called his name up, and he went up there and he competed for the men's weapons title, right? Absolutely insane. I will never forget that. I watched it live. I don't remember if I was backstage that night or not. It might have been a year before I was on US Open stage, or maybe it was one of my early years on stage, which is why I don't remember it clearly. But I vividly remember like him coming off stage and then immediately like right back on stage to do a bow form, still in his fighting uniform and everything. And that's another thing. Like, there's so many different like iconic versions of Ross. Doing bow, that is. Like, you've got the Ross that was like the young Ross with the hakama and like the red gi top, and he would like do the gainer with the bow in his mouth, right? And then you move forward, and then you get like the Ross Levine in the blue Wasaru uniform, and sometimes he had the hakama with it, sometimes he didn't, right? And then you got the full circle Ross with the yellow, and I mean, there's so many like different versions of Ross Levine's bow form that I've enjoyed watching over the years. So shout out to Ross Levine. That is the historical highlight for the first episode of season 3 of this podcast. Once again, new season, new format. I'm going to jump in the comments here. Let's see. All right. Yeah, Andrew says, I can't even think of any adult male or female that has done both fighting and forms and weapons grands at the same event in recent times. Exactly. Like, you guys help me. If somebody can think of somebody that has competed in the grands for both fighting and in forms and weapons at a world level event in recent years, let me know, because I can't think of one. Andrew can't think of one. Drop that in the comments if anybody can think of one. And let's say post 2000, right? Because we know that back in the early days of NASCA and the early days of sport karate, when there was just forms, weapons, fighting, there were a bunch of competitors that did that. Mike Bernardo, list goes on and on. Casey Marks has won forms diamond rings and has won a fighting diamond ring. I don't remember if it was in the same year or not, but there's been competitors in the past. How can you talk about this without mentioning the ultimate triple threat, the man that could win the grands in forms, weapons, and fighting, the great Kevin Thompson, right? The greatest of all time. So absolutely, we gotta look at that. I mean, I don't know if anybody post 2000 that could do that. Yeah, Andrew, 90s, he can name dozens. If we are talking post 2000, you got guys like Jason Borelli, right? So that's a potential route you could go there. But anyway, that's the historical highlight for this week. And now we move into our final segment of the evening, which is our challenge of the week, right? Mr. Lopez brings up a great point. I think that Alex Mancias may be somebody who can do that in the near future. Absolutely. Diamond ring winner, defending men's weapons diamond ring champion, Alex Mancias. He is Paul Mitchell's newest point fighter, and absolutely, Alex has a chance to make a run and get to the grands of point fighting. And if he does that in fighting and in forms at the same tournament, he'd be the first person to do that in a long time, as far as I know. So anyway, challenge of the week, #JRP challenge. This is the way this works. I'm going to give all of the viewers a challenge for something that they need to do this week. Okay, the deadline will always be the day before the next episode of the podcast. And I'm going to try to go live pretty much every Friday night. Obviously, there will be exceptions for AKA Warrior Cup when I'm going to be flying to Chicago that evening, things of that nature. But in general, shows are going to be on Friday evenings. And so the deadline will pretty much always be Thursday at midnight, which is when it becomes Friday, right? And so what it is I'm going to give the challenge, and then it's going to be a social media post, right? So you got to post it either on Facebook or on Instagram, and you got to use the #JRP challenge. That's how I'm going to find the entries, right? And then whoever wins the challenge for that week will get a feature on the next episode of the podcast. And this feature could change. A lot of times it'll just be a shout out. It'll be, hey, so-and-so won. Go check out their page. Hopefully get you some more followers, stuff like that. But if you win multiple times, or if your win is particularly impressive, maybe I'll have you as a guest on the show. Maybe I'll show one of your videos during the stream, right? Who knows what could happen, right? But you will definitely, if you win the challenge of the week, you will get featured in the following episode of the Jackson Rudolph podcast. So if you want to get featured on next week's episode, what you got to do, film a video of one section of a form that you are going to compete with either at the AK Warrior Cup or at some point in the 2022 season. I know not everybody's going to come to Warrior Cup. So a section from a form that you are going to compete with in the 2022 season. Don't give away any big secrets, because that was something that I always did throughout my prime, right? Was I would post Instagram videos of little combos before it was time for me to go to a tournament, but I would never, ever, ever give away my biggest secrets. So I don't want anybody giving away their secrets, but I do want to see, what have you been working on? Show us how you've been putting in that work. Hashtag JRP Challenge. Post a video of you running one section of a form that you are going to compete with in 2022. And if you want to make sure that I see it, tag me, tag Black Belt Magazine, and you have a chance to be featured on next week's episode. That'll be episode 87 of the Jackson Rudolph podcast. So one more time, make that post, one section of a form that you are going to perform at a tournament in 2022. Okay. Post that on Facebook or Instagram with the hashtag JRP Challenge, and you have a chance to be featured in next week's show. I'm going to look at a couple more of these comments, and then we'll be out of here for tonight, y'all. Let's see. Andrew says in the 2000s, Jason Borelli's the only one he can think of. 2001 Bluegrass, he won all 3 grands, which is really unheard of. Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. And that exactly, Andrew, you're right. 20 years ago, somebody won all 3 grand championships. Now that is next to unheard of. But we do have some that are in the mix to potentially be one of those triple threats, right? Alex Mancias is one of them. And then as you go younger, there's a lot of competitors right now that are fighting and doing forms and weapons, winning their fighting division, winning overall grands in forms and weapons. A few of them come to mind, but I don't want to leave anybody out, so I'm not going to say any names for now. So absolutely, that's something we want to see in the future. So if you enjoyed the show, make sure you hit that share button. This is season 3. We've made 86 episodes of the Jackson Rudolph podcast, and I couldn't do it without you guys' support. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you to Black Belt Magazine for sponsoring and hosting the show. Cannot speak enough about my appreciation for Black Belt Magazine and the great community that we have here. Thank you all for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, hit that share button. That's how we spread the gospel of sport karate. That's how we get the show to more and more people, to make them fall in love with the sport that we are all addicted to, and that is sport karate. So hit that share button, drop those comments, drop those likes, and most importantly, if you want to get featured in this show, hashtag JRP Challenge. Post a section of a form that you're going to compete with in 2022. I'm Jackson Rudolph. This has been episode 86 of the Jackson Rudolph podcast, and I'll see you next time.